Awesome. Hey, hello everyone. Welcome back to another episode of FlyOverThinkers. We got a good one for you today. I think it's going to be a good episode. With us, as always, we do this in reverse order. We have Eric Johnson. How are you today, sir?
Pretty good. How you guys doing?
All right. And then, of course, John Paulson.
It's great to see both of you tonight, and
Professor
thanks
John
everyone for
Paulson.
watching, because in fact, this podcast episode is going to kick ass.
Literally, kick ass. All right, so we've been throwing this around. It's this idea that I've been playing with, kind of in the back of my mind for a long time, and it's this idea of fighting. So we're going to be overthinking fighting today. And I'll put it in context, the necessity of fighting as a social check, as a socializer in a lot of ways. And then what's happened, like, do we need it? Is it toxic masculinity? Is it important? Like, what happened to fighting? Like, and I don't, and while people are listening or jumping in, I want to differentiate between fighting and assault. Assault is like being attacked, right? Like someone is attacking you, unprovoked, or out of malice or something like that. No, this is like two dudes. We have a beef. We're gonna fight. Like maybe it's at a bar. You said something wrong to my girlfriend or my wife, something like that. Something trivial like that, but still, or legit, like you did me wrong. We're gonna fucking fight. And that's what I want to talk about, this idea of fighting, because I feel like we as a society have gotten so far away from this thing that we've done for a couple millennia now. Fighting has been in human, I would say, is as human nature as eating and go to the bathroom. What do you think? Don't jump all at once.
Well, I figured John was going to go. He's got more of a fighting background here right now.
Well, Josh, just as a question, do we have a sociologist acknowledging that there are some tendencies that might actually be sort of built into human beings that are not completely culturally constructed?
I hate you, John. I hate you so much right now. I do. I will say, as a sociologist, I do not subscribe to the everything is socially constructed model. I do think there's, especially being a sex researcher, I do think there are things that are innate. Because if you look back to our ancestors, they reproduced somehow. So we have, like, it wasn't, before society, they were still reproducing. Our early human was hominids. They still had brains. They maybe not as quite as developed, but they still got it busy. So there's some drive there, right?
There is, and yep. And so, in all, seriousness, so two things I always say about that is that I can't remember who, it was probably multiple people that coined the phrase, but it's so important, because originally we would talk about this debate of nature versus nurture, and anymore we know that that is just not accurate, that it is nature and nurture, that there are these kind of biological tendencies that are then expressed within and shaped by culture and environment, and the two go in tandem. So I do think it's both, and it does seem important to acknowledge that. And when we acknowledge it, I guess another thing we should specify, at least my view, is that just because we acknowledge that something is a biological tendency doesn't necessarily mean biological determinism, meaning that it innately has to be there or has to be there to a certain degree or in a certain way. I always say that default is not destiny. So just because some of these tendencies might be in our default system, it doesn't mean that we don't have any impact on how or when they're expressed. And so fighting is a good example, physical aggression. I agree with you. And now again, and to me, this is sort of a good thing. I think that since our cultures and cultural norms have changed to discourage and to be less accepting of physical violence, even though we know it still exists in the world. But if you want to look at all the periods of history, we tend to have less of it now and less approval of it now than in the past. But unfortunately, that has sort of led us into this sense of forgetting that it's part of life. And if you look at any other species, even beyond ours, it's a part of their life. And it's easy for us to forget that. Just like one thing, and then I'll kind of end my point, over this past weekend, is that, like I've talked about before, I flunked the man test, is that I can't build it, I can't fix it, and I can't kill it. But I did kill it this past weekend. I was out in a rural area at a camping site with some friends I hadn't seen in a long time, and we went frog gigging. And so I actually gigged a frog, and then the one of the guys actually sort of like prepared the legs and cooked them on the open fire, and then we ate the legs that I had, skewered. And so what that made me think of is we could say the same thing like with fighting that often comes up about our food, which is people are so detached from food, what it is, what it takes to produce it, where it comes from, that we've lost an intimacy to it and a connection with it. And I think the same thing with kind of physical aggression and fighting. We've lost a bit of a connection to it and intimacy with it because our world is so much safer than our ancestors. That's my thought.
I think that's a great thought. I mean, that's, now we just go to the store and get food. I think if people had to rely on their frog gigging skills, a lot of people would starve to death.
Oh yeah, guess what? No, one thing I did learn is that if we do have to rely on my frog gigging skills, we're fucked. All right, so I have to up my frog gigging game.
Well, you might not be able to maintain the caloric intake that you're accustomed to, but I think you could probably hone your skills a little bit.
Yeah. So in the book On Killing by Lieutenant Colonel Dave Grossman, which I quote this book way too much in my for some reason, but it hit so many good levels. He talks about that, how we've moved. You mentioned killing. He talks about how we've moved away from this notion of death in our everyday lives. Because prior to the Industrial Revolution, like, you killed animals a lot. Like, we killed, like, you had farms, you went out and you killed chickens, you ate them, the whole process, that whole like circle of life process. And so death was a very real part of people's lives. And I think in that violence, and I hate to use this word violence, because I feel like violence is always one-sided. I feel like we need another word for this idea of like two people fighting. Like when people call UFC violent, I don't feel like it's violent because they're both consenting to do it. I feel like violence is a one-way street, right? Where violence is enacted upon you, like where you're attacked, something like that. Like, whereas like combat, or this idea of consensual battle, needs a different word than violence, a different concept, how we think about it. And that could be presentism. Maybe they didn't think about it as violence. It was just, two guys tussling in the street. Like, it happens all the time, right? Now, not so much. We're quick to shut it down.
So maybe a term that we could use could be physical aggression or physical conflict, because physical conflicts can be mutual. That's just a thought.
Mm-hmm. I like that. I like that idea of physical conflict, as opposed to violence. And going back to your nature and nurture, I think his name's Dennis Wrong. He's a sociologist or social thinker. He posited earlier that this idea that we have certain behaviors, we've become over socialized, and some behaviors that should be still prevalent, we've kind of moved away from them. And I always talk about this in my one-on-one class, like farting. Farting is a very human social thing, or a very human thing, but we've over socialized to the point we're not supposed to do it in public, or mix. That's kind of like a social faux pas. And then I always talk about picking our nose arguably, and eating it. But we'll say picking our nose for the one thing. If you look at all of our primate relatives, they all pick their nose. So they all pick their nose and eat it. But we don't do that. We're socialized along an early in parts of our life to like, stop picking your nose, stop picking your nose. But as soon as you zone out when you're driving and your kind of lizard brain takes over, what's the first thing you do? You go knuckle deep, pointing at your brain, right? Just to see what's in there. I think there's some biological components to this. And I think fighting this idea of physical conflict is in there. Because you're right, because if you look at other species, they have social checks within species, right? Little nips, maybe even some attack, some like altercations. A lot of our primate, like chimpanzees, fight for dominance, gorillas fight for dominance. Like fighting is a part of those lives, and especially in our closest relatives as well. Bonobos is a little different. They like to bone, but I would argue they probably still have some physical confrontation. So yeah, I think
Well,
I
and,
don't know.
and yeah, and I agree with you. And again, not to overly quote him, especially since actually, I think I said before, I've never even read one book by a complete book by Sigmund Freud. But two things that Freud suggested that I do think are quite useful and accurate. So in this one book that he wrote, that again I've not read, but there's a classic line in there. It's called Civilization and Its Discontent. Is that Freud suggests that the consequence of civilization is neurosis, and so neurosis being this term used for more of an anxiety-based existence, which often does come through suppression and having to keep in check what he called those id, the instinctual drives. Again, the word instinct is problematic, but we'll leave that aside. But these sort of these more biological tendencies and drives, what Freud suggested was, if we want to have civilization, we have to find ways to keep some of those in check and to mediate them. But the consequence of doing that is that it's going to cause some psychological consequences. And, going back to some of that wiring, I've always thought about writing this up. So maybe here I'm putting it out into the world. This would be my adaptation, is that, Freud was often described as saying that the two primary driving forces for human behavior are sex and aggression. And so by sex, he's not just meaning only biological sex, but those are both umbrella terms. The way that I would reword it, again, I think whenever we kind of let the guard down, we kind of fall back to some of this, like the going knuckles deep in the nose, is that I would say that the primary driving forces of human behavior, adapting Freud's language, would be the aspiration towards interpersonal dominance and access to reproductive resources. So actually that, this kind of because a lot of, especially in our social species, a lot of these physical conflicts play out either between groups or between species, but then also within, as the people in the group are trying to establish, okay, how's this look? How's this organized? Who has what? Who does what? I get to swim with dolphins one time, and the dolphins were up close to us, and the trainer was, making them do tricks and things like that. But the dolphin had it look like these deep scratches on it. I'm like, what is that? She's like, well, that's where they bite each other. And that's part of in their social order, some of how they're both playing with each other, jockeying kind of like in position. So yeah, I think that we have forgotten that a degree of physical conflict is built in. It doesn't have to be bad. We then just get to the issue of, so when does it seem to be suppressed, maybe inappropriately or unhelpfully so, in the winter times when we should go, yeah, we really probably shouldn't encourage physical conflict or aggression or violence of that kind or in those situations.
Well, talking about knuckles deep in the nose, sometimes when I pull up to a stoplight, I will start picking my nose just to entertain the people in the car next to me. I just pretend like that they don't even that I don't even see them. Like it's just something that makes me laugh. So
I don't know. What are your thoughts, Eric? Do you go in there?
well, yeah, yeah, I think we're all wired to eat, reproduce, and find shelter, and that's any living creature. And what comes with that is to protect those resources. A friend of mine is like he's like a far socialist communist, believes that having personal property isn't expressed in nature. And I said, well, you can't be territorial like every animal you see on these wild encounters. You can't be territorial without the idea of ownership. So if you can't think that personal property or ownership doesn't exist in nature, or you go tell a bear that when you get too close to its cubs. Like you're going to find certain types of aggression or defense or offense trying to hunt for your food. Or I mean, it's definitely a thing that is wired into our nature as a tool. At least it's not a tool is not really a weapon until it's misused. So if you're a hammer can be a weapon, but it also drives a nail. So you can have inherent ability of violence without misusing it. So
I like that inherent ability for violence as long as it's not misused. So, right. So now we've moved so far away from this idea of death and confrontation, or not confrontation, but like daily death, and we've become a safer place, safer society. And now we have laws about fighting, right? A lot of states, it's illegal to fight, it's illegal to have a physical altercation. And so when you do, and I'm curious of how we got here. And I think John, you mentioned something about when is the right time. Well, actually, you both just when's the right time to have these things, and maybe sometimes it's not. And speak more to that. Like, I agree with you, and I think that's kind of how is that an element of civilization? Is that just us being more civilized,
Yeah.
or are we lying to ourselves of like, no, we need this, and just as Freud is saying, are we going to have psychosis if we don't have some sort of physical release?
Yep. Uh, Somebody who I think makes a good point on this, and I've not completed the book. I was listening to the audiobook and I just didn't get to finish it because it's 18 hours. But I bought the physical copy. Is a gentleman named Jared Diamond, um, who's done a lot of interdisciplinary cross field work, sort of looking into aspects of environment and biology, but also culture and cultural anthropology. He wrote a book called The World Until Yesterday, and the subtitle is What Can We Learn from Traditional Societies? And there's like a question mark. And so in there, he talks about some of the strategies that up until rather recently, people use to negotiate physical conflicts, even war between different groups. So I don't know. I think it's a good point, Josh, that have we almost gone too far past the mark to where it's no longer helpful. One argument I think he would sort of suggest, from the little bit I've listened to that, is that um, we sort of made a bargain that putting the responsibility for handling that and regulating it into laws and into the state is seen as a better option than people continually carrying those out and worrying about those, just kind of again and again and again. Now, he said there's some limits to that. He said, like, he talked about that sometimes, maybe you don't get as much of a chance to have a sense of retribution or restoration of a relationship when things are play out in a court, as opposed to, he said, hey, this is somebody I got to live with and live around. We got to figure out a way to figure out sort of make a peace with this situation, because we're going to continue to see each other. Whereas like in a big city, you may never see somebody that you get into a physical conflict with again. Here's one situation I want to throw out, because I want to, maybe we can kind of like use it and then we'll anchor backwards, because I agree with you, Josh. I do think that maybe there's some times where we've made it too prohibited to look at physical conflict. But now on the other end, so here within just a couple of weeks ago, obviously there'll be aspects of this case I'm not aware of, that maybe even the public are not aware of, but here's the 400 kind of foot sketch of it. So up in Chicago, which is no longer the Windy City, it's the shooting city, is that there's been all this crime, but recently, so the mayor, Roy Lightfoot, who I think is doing a horrible job, but this is one thing that I thought she made a good point. She's been in conflict with a state's attorney whose name is Kim Fox. So there was this daytime shooting, all right? It's on film. So there's actually film footage of this shooting in a neighborhood during the day between members of rival gangs. It wasn't just two guys, it was two small groups of these rival gangs shooting at each other. Not only is it on footage, police responded to it in marked units, in their uniforms, and the state's attorney, Kim Fox, is not pressing any charges against the shooters. And one of the things that she cited, and this is what Mayor Lightfoot was getting on, and this is the thing where this kind of raised my eyebrows. She said that one of the reasons she's not pressing charges is because she's just considering them mutual combatants. So it's almost like, hey, they're mutual combatants, so we're not going to charge them with a crime. And there's a part of me that goes, are you serious? These guys were carrying out a gun battle during the day in a neighborhood, and you're just gonna be like, well, there's mutual combatants. So I think that obviously, like with certain violence, including gun violence, you're putting a lot others around you into danger. So again, you and I get into an octagon and settle our disagreements within a set of rules and just kind of one-on-one. Maybe that's different than you're shooting in a neighborhood. And so, that really got to me, like, well, we're not going to press charges because they were mutual combatants. I'm like, I'm sorry. No, I think you should be arresting people and prosecuting them for shooting at each other in a neighborhood during the day.
Well, maybe you should broaden your perspective a little bit on, the mutual combatant thing, because the two of you in an octagon, that's UFC style. But what they were doing was more of a, WrestleMania Royal Rumble style. It's just more people involved. Modern day, that we don't have swords. We do, but people don't run around with swords. So that's why they're using guns. I understand. No, I'm with you. The gun thing is definitely puts other people at risk, and it's dangerous to more than just the parties involved. But
well, let's unpack this. Let's dive into this for a moment. Like, yes, in a neighborhood, there's a lot of people in danger. Okay, so if anything, someone should be brought up on charges for reckless. What is it? Some of the firearms in a city. Just firing a gun in city limits, that kind of thing. Okay, putting people at risk, but I'm okay with the idea of these equal combatants. Like, what if they went out into a field, or fucking they made a paintball course that just had reinforced walls, and they're like, all right, it's fucking steal the flag if you live, like something like that, like steal the bandana, you're red, you're blue, whatever, and a lot of is that because you're right, like a lot of people freak out about guns. I'm a gun owner, not like major gun owner, but it's just modern weaponry. You're right. People had swords, people had bows, bow and arrow was the dominant weapon until 200 years ago, 250 years ago, not very long ago.
Yeah, but even today, actually, in the international news in Norway, there was a series of shootings. Like 5 people got shot, a couple are dead, and the shootings were bow and arrow.
In Norway.
Yes, and that was today.
Wow, I didn't see that.
I do have a compound and a crossbow. I very much enjoy the crossbow. The crossbow was actually the first weapon to penetrate. I think it was the Chinese used to make armor out of rhino hide. It's real thick skin, and a lot of the weapons couldn't get through it until the crossbow. It would pierce
Good use of
the.
penetration.
Oh yeah,
So Josh here. So let me give you a little bit. I'm gonna push back to this point, of, hey, what if they just went out in the field and handled it? Because we could then say, especially if we're trying to anchor these two positions, we could then say though that then culturally sanctions and encourages those type of behaviors for responding to and handling conflict. So maybe other people would say that when we're setting up these norms and values and laws for a society, we're trying to send a subtle message that handling conflicts through physical aggression or violence is not something that we see as wanted or ideal. But then that takes us back to the main point, of maybe then questioning even that, which is, hey, when we prohibit that too much, then are we denying ourselves and some of our earliest behaviors and strategies, even within cultures, for dealing with this? So it kind of comes back to almost like it's like the underlying message that you're trying to send whenever you're identifying acceptable ways to handle a situation.
Mhm. So think about what is the adage? An armed society is a polite society. Okay, well, if we
that's what
had
came
these,
to mind.
yeah, if we had these avenues of dealing with this is an extreme version, right? We're talking about the very like a super extreme version of dealing with a confrontation. Like, all right, well, let's go out to the killing field and see who wins. Let's see how it goes. Actually, I'm reading these book called Red Rising, and the higher echelon of society has that. They have a killing field where if you had a beef with somebody, they had these like sword type things. You would go out and you know whoever wins is basically dueling. We go back to dueling, but a little maybe slightly different, better guns, and more strategy. I don't know. I don't know. Maybe we've come too far. Maybe that's something that society still needs. Because I always think about it didn't happen when I was in high school, but you hear our dads talking about, yeah, if you had a beef with somebody, you went down to the gymnasium and the gym coach would put boxing gloves on you and you guys would sort it out together. Like, did that really happen? If it did, like, why did we get away from that? Like, you know, and I, I feel like maybe there's something to that on a very basic level. But so I want to build from there because I have a theory as to why this is a problem now, and arguably why we have not the school shootings, but violence in school. So we just had that school shooting in Texas where this was an African American juvenile he was bullied and he brought a gun to school and he shot like 6 people and 4 of them died. Right. So, and they were talking about is because he was bullied. They're talking about this aspect. Okay, he was bullied, and I get that. And we go back to the Columbine. That's the exact same reason they were bullied, and they, it's not a new thing, but our ways we deal with aggression and bullying have changed now. We're not allowed to fight in school. You're not allowed to fight. Both of you get in trouble. Can really impact your academic career, your academic life to a certain extent. But for me, what I see is the issue of bullying and the issue of fighting, especially among young people. It's not necessarily the fighting itself. in my opinion, I feel like the two or three things have ruined this, and it is the hype in boxing and now mixed martial arts, and also I'm blaming the movie Friday and the internet sensation World Star. These things have impacted our ability to fight and have a just honorable conflict, because now it's no longer win lose we're fine. It's if you lose, the humiliation is so much worse. And the reason I quote Friday is that line, that famous line when he knocks out Tebow. He's like, "You got knocked the fuck out," right? Everybody knows that line, right? That that I feel like became this cultural phenomenon, and it sparked World Star. And now when people, at the beginning, when the internet was videos were popular, you see these fights, people would be yelling out World Star, someone would get knocked out and they would be humiliated. The humiliation of getting knocked out or beaten on film and then it go viral is just it hurts me so much, because I'm like, look, these we should respect these two people from stepping up. Like, even the person who lost, hey, you didn't step up. You know what? Be an honorable winner. And if you're the audience, fucking respect the loser too, because they stepped up. And I feel like that humiliation of losing is what's causing a lot of this extra conflict to be escalated. No one takes an ass whooping anymore because it's fucking embarrassing. In rain.
Well, I worked bar security for a long time, and I never threw a single punch over, however many years. I started in '05 and still do it occasionally, but I did it from like '05 to 10 pretty regularly. And I was in a lot of fighting situations, and when you know how the body moves and how it's not supposed to move, you don't really have to throw a punch. I've broken my hands and knuckles, in my younger years, and it's not fun. So I didn't want to punch anybody if I didn't have to. But when I stopped, you're talking about humiliation. It made me think of this story. When I stopped working there at doing security, I showed up one night at the bar that I used to work at, and one of the regulars was there, and hadn't seen him in a while, and we're standing outside in the parking lot, and he says, "Man, where you been? I miss you working here," and yada yada yada, and he had a friend of his with him who was just staring at me, just mean mugging me while me and this guy's having a conversation, and my buddy stops talking, and his buddy looks at me and goes, "Why are you a bouncer? You ain't shit." And I said, "Right on." And I just kept talking, and he just kept running his mouth. And I said, "All right, man." I said, "You've clearly got something to say, so, or, you want to do something. So, come at me, do what you got to do. Let's do this, get it out of your system, And he charged me. Like I did. I was just, I thought it was just something funny. I was like, "Oh, I'm done." But no, he charged me, and I put his ass down and made him tap. Like, I didn't punch him, but I submitted him like 3 times, and he finally got up angry because I let him up. He, like, I hurt his feelings. Like, I don't know. It was one of the dumbest encounters I've ever had. But yeah, I hurt his pride, and I helped him up and went and bought him a drink afterwards. But yeah, I hurt his pride more than I hurt him physically. But
And but and so that brings up sort of a good point that, again, I'm not articulating well from Jared Diamond's book, but, and Josh, you make a good point, which is we no longer in a place where, okay, I got an ass whooping, let me just accept that and move forward, because of the sense of almost like this just excessive taunting before and after, and this sense of pride. And so what Diamond say is that, so then either how do we decide that we're done, after this conflict, or that we're done and how do we come back together? So it's like, okay, this is done. Let me buy you a beer. So it's almost either that you have to find a way to either come back together or some type of a script for like, we're done and we've excommunicated the other. Or maybe if it's in a group, it's like, hey, we can find a way to bring you back, but no, you're sort of out of the tribe, so to speak. That's sort of like the hard part of this, that again, we've lost the ability to be okay with, all right, I didn't come out on top there. That doesn't necessarily mean that I'm less than. It just means that I got to accept the fact that I did not prevail in that situation. And then how do we do that? Because if not, then if you think you should always prevail, or that your pride is hurt, then that leads to all those kind of like additional behaviors of, and I'm going to show them and others. And then that's when you get into like the retribution, and maybe even like kind of mass retribution, like a mass shooting. Josh, as you were talking, I have sort of a kind of a thought about this. Like I said, where does some of this come from? I think in addition to the tauntingness and people no longer being okay, just like, hey, I got put in my place, is that I think that one of the things that comes down to it is that we also now have built in, like you said, with the laws. So let's say that, for example, like if I got my ass kicked by Eric, is that, so one, we can criminalize maybe even our physical conflict. But even if we didn't do that, then there also then becomes the issue of, so during that physical conflict, he inflicted such bodily injury that I actually now have a loss of functioning or productivity. And so then what happens is, okay, so who's held accountable for that? And so, that's where you get into like some of these penalties for damages, and things like that. So we've also sort of lost maybe the sense of, hey, if you got into this conflict, then you also forfeit any like, right to kind of say, oh, well, you hurt me, so now I can go back and make you responsible for what you did to me. And so it almost has to be a sense of, hey, if we entered into this duel, you're in the duel, and kind of how it comes out. But I think that that's also another part that came into this, is that when we started to have these developed laws and systems for dealing with damages.
Yeah, like in the 90s, everybody got sue happy. That like late 80s, early 90s, and even now, like people got sue happy, where it's like, all right, well, you come in my yard, I'm going to sue you, that kind of stuff. And you're right. I'm not sure what triggered that. I don't. It would be worth looking into. Like, is it so insidious that it was like protecting loss of function for workers? Does it become that like capitalist? How capitalism has ruined our ability to decide to have a physical altercation. Like, really, like, it's there. The argument can be made for sure. Like, did we create these laws to protect workers, to protect productivity? Like, oh, that would hurt my feelings. Ugh.
Well,
What a
I think
life.
that's one aspect of it, but it's more so like, I got injured to the point that I can't pay my bills or feed my family. That's another, yeah, capitalism's one thing, but yeah, damages and, not being able to function properly
Mhm.
is a different thing. But we were talking about the gang wars and gang violence earlier, and it kind of made me think about, what most of the time it's a turf war. Like, we sell drugs here, you can't sell drugs here. So places like Illinois that now have dispensaries, how does that affect, the the supply and demand is now kind of offset. So what do they fight about now? Like, I can go buy weed down at the corner. I don't, I
Yeah,
don't
you still
need.
have crack, cocaine, heroin,
Yeah,
girls.
I guess so. But and like I said, I don't know much about gang wars and turf wars and shit. That's not. I was just curious. That's something that came to mind while ago when we were talking about it. But.
And so Josh, maybe adding to that list of like, maybe one of your, points that you suggest of maybe why we've had this change against, physical conflict and not seeing it as acceptable or anymore, in that whole sense of the mocking culture. I have another one that they kind of interconnect, and they're almost going to sound conspiratorial. So I hope that they don't. But actually, so here's what I think they connect. I think that one of the dynamics that has changed our approach to and acceptance of kind of physical conflict and aggression has actually been, especially maybe here in sort of the Western kind of hemisphere, has been the 20th century and the impact on what I'm going to call innocence. So give me a second here. You look at these incredible wars that now more than ever, because of advances in military technology, but also because of advances in photographs and videos, is that people, because wars always had an impact on innocence. I mean, we just know that's always been the case, but is that you now were able to see that so much more extensively that I think it creates this increased sensitivity to, well, maybe it's all right if the two of you go knock each other's lights out, but what if your aggression spills over into people that aren't involved and don't deserve it? I think that the wars of the 20th century, for some reason, did that in a way that previous wars maybe didn't. But I also think that in the 20th century is that it's also because we increasingly, again, it's always been that way, but now we're becoming more aware of it. We can see it more than ever before, is that we saw physical aggression and violence used against people that we would identify as innocents, especially physical aggression and violence being used as an extension of racism, and then also violence against women. I think that because of the which again I think is one of the most important things we've ever done as a human species. I'm not saying it's a bad thing, but I actually think that our continued move towards improving civil rights for people that have been disadvantaged, again, it's one of the best things as human beings we've ever done. But I think that as part of that, there has become this script that sort of says violence is a part of those systems and those peoples that have always hurt us and held us down. So violence is bad. And so that's why we can't sanction it. That's why we have to get rid of it, because you see the partner who's using physical aggression and dominance and control against their intimate partner, and you go, whoa, that's wrong. You see it used against people that are just trying to eat a sandwich. It's like, oh, and so I think that actually the role of what I'll call innocence, even though that's always been there, I think has gotten an increased attention from the 20th century and beyond, from not only wars, but then also the way that violence has seemed to become synonymous with, it's just a part of those people that hurt us innocents, so we have to get rid of violence. So that's a thought.
Yeah, I think there's something to that. Like they talk about legitimate violence or legitimate authority. I think it's Weber. Uh, Max Weber talks about that, another sociology 101 guy. This idea that, the state is the only one that can utilize legitimate violence, and the reason is to impose their will. That's really what authority is the ability, almost the authority to use violence to impose will. That's what government is and what authority is there. And I think we, legally speaking, like, to remove people's ability to be violent, I think is a sort of attempt to, sure, minimize what we'll call it collateral damage to innocence, right? That's what you're getting at. Uh, on a higher level, sure, but on that individual social check level, like, what are we talking about? Like someone in a bar who gets, like bumped into because someone got, like a chin check or something. I don't know. I get what you're saying, on that higher level for sure, but I don't know, on an individual level.
Well, again, because I agree with you, and because this is now where I would sort of the pendulum would swing back the other way. Again, where I think in general, yeah, I don't, yeah, I tend to be a little bit more of the we probably shouldn't encourage aggression as a problem-solving strategy. But so again, what happens is that since you had that sort of sense of, the kind of violence against the innocents, but again, so then all of a sudden, then you get this whole idea of violence itself is bad and wrong. So guess what? The two guys bump each other at the bar, they handle their business out in the parking lot. That ends up being just as wrong because all violence is wrong because now it's all been put in one cup. And I'm with you. I wouldn't do that. I mean, because like, listen, we have to be able to differentiate that. Okay, so these two males, jockeying for hierarchical dominance, just like a troop of chimps, is that okay? That's different than these other things, but we now have this. It seems to be this. This is my conspiracy theory. We seem to have this sort of like kind of worldview that says that all violence and aggression is bad and wrong, and I think that's the overstep. So again, there's maybe some other times I'm like, yeah, maybe we should encourage it, but I think that's kind of I think it sort of started off some of those things, but now it's casting too big of a shadow.
I think on a conspiratorial side of things, I think, to discourage violence to such a degree that people become more docile, they're more easy to control, they're more easy to manipulate. If violence of any kind is illegal and not encouraged and punished, then I think, yeah, that's going to push people to be more passive and less dominant, less aggressive, less violent. And that type of people is easier to rule and easier to control whenever they don't see violence as an option and they see it as, something bad. Like, does that make sense, John?
It does, and I think I think it's a great point. I was thinking about this earlier today, not to maybe add another layer on this, and we could always come back to this, at a different time. But is that, when we talk about sort of the war on competence. Okay, so now again, if you have a certain competence in physically how to handle yourself and keep yourself safe, protect yourself and others, that's sort of taking a hit. So it doesn't have to be with physical aggression, but people are increasingly being encouraged to be less sort of self-sustaining and competent and to have to sort of like go on others. So I think that aggression, is one aspect of maybe that bigger picture, because you're right, like there was so again, like Josh is the one who is on the TikTok. I don't have that, don't want it, but of course I keep hearing about it. But I guess there's all of these different challenges that come up, and one of the recent challenges was slap a teacher. And now I think mainly this was like grade school or high school. I teach at university. I don't think it was that. But I can remember, again, one of those first thoughts of being, I sure hope nobody that is in our building or in my class actually has that idea, because that viral video ends up looking a lot different than they thought and planned. Like all of a sudden, like, oh, look, I'm going to slap this teacher. You better pack a lunch. You got a problem, So it's one of those deals. But actually, just even in noticing that reaction in me, I kind of noticed. I'm like, well, you know what? There would be people that maybe wouldn't have the confidence, to be able to be like, okay, if a situation like that comes up, I feel like I could respond to it. So maybe I would still be vulnerable, but maybe I feel less vulnerable than other people would. And so the less vulnerable that you feel, the less reliant you become on others, and the less they can actually control you and coerce you. So I think you've got a good point there. And of course, some people would go, oh my gosh, even suggesting that you might, physically respond with aggression if somebody did that, that's a toxic trait right there. Nope, sorry. People have been attacked since the beginning of human history. We have to find ways to keep ourselves safe.
Let's see.
So we are navigating technical difficulties right now. Josh's computer actually decided to be aggressive and violent towards him. And so he had to be removed from this. So we're trying to come to his aid and rescue and get him back in. Are you able to send that to him, Eric? I don't see what he's talking about.
I trying here. Let's see.
Or here, I see in the message what he's talking about. I think I can
Okay, well, I'll let you try to do
I
that.
can do this real quick as soon as I pull up my email.
I'm technologically challenged here.
I'm barely one step up from a courier owl. So it's like everyone right now is still watching. Take this time, talk amongst yourselves, kick these ideas around, ponder them. How would you reply to them?
Yeah, I think that's kind of, like I said, it might sound a little conspiratorial, but I think that is a big factor in today's society, to eliminate violence, because you would be eliminating any pushback. If there he is.
Sorry about that.
No, well, thank John. He
Well, no, I didn't quite. I was just now trying to get to my email to forward it to you. I didn't get it sent though. So,
no, did mine work?
Apparently, there's a button on the side of my mouse that I didn't know about, and I would accidentally hit it, and it fucking kicked me out. I'm like, oh, panic.
Oh, well, welcome back.
Thanks. So what I miss?
So I was mentioning that kind of on a conspiratorial note about how our society has tried to suppress violence, to make it illegal, to discourage it, to make it not seem as an option, because that would make us easier to govern or control or rule or whatever if we're more passive, docile, non-aggressive people.
And one thing I said building off of that, and this could be a whole nother focus for us sometime, is that I think that we could also maybe put this into the same category as the general attack on competence. And that sense of having to sort of perform and to be sort of good at things. And so kind of aggression and physical conflict and being able to sort of handle yourself generally is a type of competence, but there's other ones too. So I was saying that the more self-sufficient people are, the more competent they are to do the things in their life, the less you have to rely on others and the less others can control you. So and again, maybe go back, because I think I heard this book title, I have to look it up, but and again, I can see some of the I can see some of the points, but it's like the myth of meritocracy. It's like, oh really? So yeah, maybe we don't have a pure meritocracy, but there are aspects of thinking about that I think are actually better than other approaches. But so what it is, it's this general attack on skill, competence, that sense of all that, and that comes about in aggression too. Because if you don't give people the ability to keep themselves safe, then you make them reliant on others, such as the state, like you were talking about with Max Weber.
Yeah, I think there's was it Jocko Willenick in his book. He talks about not praising, but like we still need men, particularly that can tap into aggression, that are willing to be violent. And I think, especially in the last 10, 15 years or so, we've hit this connection to this notion of toxic masculinity. And I think aggression, and again, I don't like this term violence, but this physical conflict has become synonymous with toxic masculinity, and I think it's detrimental. You're right. And again, for those listening, I think it's important to differentiate what we're talking about. We're not talking about violence towards someone who's like a victim. We're not talking about domestic violence. We're not talking about attacking someone. Like that is violence. To me, that is true violence as a definition, right? It creates this emotional response. We're talking about physical confrontation as a social check. Chin checks are my favorite. This idea of chin checks. I borrow it from Letterkenny. They fight a lot in that show, and I love it. Like and what happens when they're done fighting? Like they hand the guy up. They're like, "All right, let's get a beer." Like it's done. It's settled. And I just think I feel like we as a society, especially for men, need to learn to tap into that. I would argue that women need to learn that too, because when women fight, it's much more emotional and violent, and they hold a grudge. They don't know how to some do. I don't want to say all, but a lot of them will say that no, we hold on to that shit. Like no, you gotta be able to let that go. And I think that's what we need to differentiate again for those listening. That like we're not talking about causing violence to innocent people or attacking. It's just this social check aspect of it.
Yep. And so maybe
You're right.
yep, and I agree because so maybe there's this, kind of aspect that again, sort of physical aggression, conflict, and even violence, there can be some tendencies towards that, like let's just say in the male psyche. And again, I'm not saying that's both good and bad. So I'm not saying that we shouldn't have it. And then so obviously there could be certain ways where, in a certain manners where that could be very hurtful, unproductive, and toxic. But I'm with you is that I think what we've done though is we've taken that small part of that idea and it cast a big shadow. So now instead of, I hate the term toxic masculinity, because really what I think they're trying to say is that masculinity is toxic. And I agree with you and with the comments that Jocko makes. There's always going to be a need for for human beings to be able to tap into some of those typical traditional male energies. And so that's why I think that we also need to talk about, like I said before, heroic masculinity. So, you don't call all masculinity toxic and try to eliminate it. You talk about the aspects of it that are toxic, and then you also identify the parts that are heroic. And how do we encourage that? How do we build on that? Because it's always going to be a necessary part of our human walk, I think.
Well, and
Yeah.
I remember growing up, like we just played rough. Like fighting was part of our play, even, me and my brother and the neighborhood kids. And, I remember at one point I had a 2x4 with a nail sticking out of it, and I swung it and stuck it in my brother's ass. And like he pulled a horseshoe spike out of the ground and speared me in the back with it. Like that's just how we played. Like we played rough. Like we whipped people with car antennas, and at the end of the day, we're sitting there at the dinner table eating dinner. Like it was no hard feelings. It was, for some reason, that's just how we played. And a lot of kids don't play like that now, and I discourage my kids from fighting each other. But so I don't know. Maybe that's a step in the right direction. But keeping people from keeping kids from being violent. I don't know. I'm surprised I made it out alive and have all my digits still. But
Well, how about this? Maybe we teach. Like you mentioned at the very beginning. Maybe we, much like you know, gun training or knife training or other skills, maybe that's something that is important for people to learn, like to hone aggression in a way that, sure, it could be physical, it could be physical conflict, like the importance of taking a boxing class or a jujitsu class, like understanding what you can do to another human body, is important. But knowing that sometimes and being able to regulate that, like, you know what, like you're like the guy in your when you were trying to check you as a bouncer, like you didn't hurt him, you just put him on the ground a few times and you made him submit. Like you knew how to control that body and you knew the necessity of it. And then you bought him a beer and I'm sure everything was fine after that, you know, because you're right, like a lot of damage can happen when people are unskilled. And I think fighting used to be a skill that people had, like you said, playing rough and tumble. You learn how to like control your body as you get older, and then when you are older and you can cause damage, like how to not like. I think there was an incident where a guy got punched and he fell down. He got knocked out and he hit his head and he died. Like that's a tragedy. Like you're saying, that's like the high end of this. Like, okay, well, maybe my chin check isn't as hard because because I've done this, because I've had it done to me, that I know not to hit this guy that hard. Like being able to control. So just like learning how to use any tool, you learn how to use your aggression, you learn how to use physical confrontation or physical conflict as a tool.
Well, and I think that making it illegal, like in some states, even defending yourself, you can get in trouble. You can get charges pressed on you just for fighting back. And that's garbage. I think that yeah, I think that self-defense is something that kids should be taught. And that, like you mentioned, the old adage of, an armed society is a polite society. It doesn't even have to be with guns. If people just knew, hey, there's going to be consequences if I fuck with this person. Like they might know some shit. They might Jackie Chan all over my ass. Like if it's, part of, our culture that, yeah, they not necessarily, like I said, that they're armed with guns, but they're armed with the knowledge of how to take care of themselves. So from a self-defense aspect, like, yeah, I think everybody should learn how to defend themselves. And that would make a more polite society because, people prey on weaker people and, they try to prey on, people that look vulnerable and that they, so yeah, I think that would eliminate a lot of problems if people were able to and encouraged to defend themselves.
I'm going to sorry, John. I would take it a step further. It's not just about self-defense. I think we should learn how to be offensive as well to mediate those issues right away. Like I said, the chin check. Sometimes you need to do that first. You're not defending yourself. Like someone's mouthing off. Boom. Like so. In this one instance, this is my favorite story of my brothers. Like my older brother, he can be hot tempered, but like much like older brothers, like you don't fuck with their siblings, that kind of thing. Him and my younger brother were at a bar, and this I don't know if I told the story. Uh, they were in the bathroom, and this guy was in the bathroom, and my older brother's wife stuck her head in the bathroom to like say something to her, and this other guy was like being impolite to her. I don't know what was said, and then my younger brother, who knows no fear, said something to him like, "Hey, man, that's my sister-in-law. You need to watch your mouth." That kind of thing. Like a legit moment, almost like a bar moment. Well, they stepped out and went up to the bar, my two brothers. This guy comes in between them and like says something to my older brother about having a problem. And he was like, "Oh no, you got a problem with the other guy, the brother behind you." So he talks to my younger brother, who's like, "Hey, we're gonna have a problem." He's like, "No, you just need to watch your mouth, like be more respectful, that kind of thing. A social check. We don't have these, a social check." And because of this whole not will, whatever he need to escalate it, he goes out to this car. This guy goes out to his car, comes back in, and goes up to my younger brother, and my older brother had watched him come back in. And he goes, "Are we going to have a problem?" And pulls up his shirt. He went and got a pistol, right? But he got his shirt halfway up, and my older brother had already made contact. Just and they thought he like it sounded like a 2x4 snapping in half. He hit him so hard. The guy went out, the gun went across the floor. My brother took it out and set it on the bar. Now, like, I feel like that's one of those moments. I don't know what happened to the guy. The police showed up and they took him off, right? They were going to try to arrest my older brother, but everybody was like, no, the guy had a gun. Like he protected my younger brother, right? It was a social check, a very nice chin check, and needed to happen. And I like to think in the back of my mind that the guy who got hit, maybe when he like regained consciousness, was like, you know what? That was a bad idea. Like, I just maybe I shouldn't go get, escalate and just I took my ass whipping and yep, that I was in the wrong. Like those are the instances that I think where offense is needed. Like it's not about defense, it's offense. I don't know.
No, I completely agree, and that's always like the author John was talking about, like how do you end that situation? Is that guy going to accept that, oh man, I did something stupid? Um, probably shouldn't do that again, or is he going to be like, well, I'm back out of jail now, and I've still got a gun, and this guy will be probably back at this bar, and like that's maybe he'll need another chin check. I don't know, like what to what degree do people learn lessons? I mean, you guys are both teachers. I'm sure you've encountered people that aren't quick learners. So in a situation like that, you get taught a lesson and they just don't get it right away. They're going to probably have that same approach toward that test. They're going to come back into that test room with the same approach, maybe a little bit more knowledge of, maybe I shouldn't show my cards like that, and, maybe get the gun out faster. Like people are idiots. I mean, it's hard to, I don't
and
know. Yeah.
and that would be one of those situations where, wow, that's just so scary. I'm glad they're both all right, because and that might be one of those cases, which is maybe if there was a more of a widely sort of sanctioned route towards physical conflict and then conflict resolution, so that when it was done, there was like it was either done or there's a way to kind of come back. Because the scary part of that is that this person left to go get an incredibly dangerous weapon and came back, and then that's the part where that just now took it to and escalated it to a whole different suggestion. Maybe things wouldn't escalate like that as much if we had some of these other systems in place. But right now, especially over the past kind of couple of decades, unfortunately that has become the strategy, which is almost like there's this script. It's like it's pushed it to the extremes. You have this one script that says no aggression should be allowed because it's all bad, and another one that says the way I handle things is to take people out with guns. It's like, when did this become like the okay thing? It's like that maybe it should be okay if two guys are gonna like get each other's face and raise their voice and put hands on each other, but that it's not okay to go get an extremely dangerous weapon to come back to handle a situation like that where there was disagreements over tone of what was being said. So what by actually repressing the aggression too much, it's like you hyperinflate it in other situations.
That's a great point, John.
Well, and I'm sure that part of his line of thinking about going to getting the gun was that he is in a situation where he's outnumbered, and that was his way of tipping the scale to favor his odds. I understand that. I don't condone it, but I understand it. Um, but people that think it's an okay thing to say something inappropriate to a lady at a bar like that, they're already not, rocking the same common sense that most people. I mean, if common sense was common, everybody'd have it. But um, yeah, so they're already not going to be making the wisest decisions. If that's how the fight started or what the fight was about. With somebody saying something inappropriate to the wrong person or whatever. It's that's just a thought, but
Yeah. I think this idea, much like what you're talking about, John, would help, especially bullying. Like, even if you had a bully and you stood up to a bully, say in high school, right? And you may get your ass kicked, but at least you stood up to him. And if we could change the culture of that to where, it's like, all right, well, you stood up to it, you lost. It sucks. Even though you were in the right, you lost. But at least you let this person know, you know, unfortunately, some people's language is physical. And so you let that person know. Maybe that person's bullying you at that point. Like, you know what? He stood up to me. That's awesome. I'm going to give that, like respect to that. Because that's what a lot of bullying is disrespect, right? And then it just grows and escalates and grows disrespect and ridicule and grows and becomes physical. And maybe we learned how to navigate those spaces a little better. I don't know, but I definitely think in order for that to happen, we have to be humble winners and gracious losers at the same time. Like it's a tough lesson to learn.
That's a great point, but you're right.
Yeah. I don't know. Any final thoughts? Fighting?
I don't know. I try to more so these days. I try to debate more than fight. my body doesn't recover like it used to, so I try to settle my differences with words. Uh, if somebody wants to get in that arena with me, I won't suffer much damage from that. but but yeah, I think it is necessary at some point to put people in their place. When I was in school, I walked into the bathroom one day and there was a kid that had knocked this other kid's glasses off and was rubbing soap in his face, and that doesn't make any logical sense. Like, why would you treat another person like that? It was obvious bullying. But I approached him and I said, man, that's not cool. And I had quite a bit of size on this kid that was doing this. And I said, how about you take some soap and rub it in your face and see how bad that sucks? So he did. And like, I didn't have to make him, but he knew that I was big enough to make him. So he did that. And I was like, it's pretty shitty, isn't it? Yeah, don't fucking do that. So but yeah, that was something that could have escalated into to something a little more violent, but it was just something funny that had come to mind. But yeah, I think yeah, there's definitely a place for it at times. But
Yeah, because I think maybe my final thought, and something that just came to me from us talking about this, is that I think that one of the benefits of getting more comfortable and more confident being able to navigate conflicts, including ones that are physical or potentially could become physical. Like you said, that whole self-defense and defense, but preparedness, being aware of these things, developing the skills, whether it's physical stuff or kind of like shooting training, whatever. But to me, it's like the more comfortable and confident you get with it, it's like eventually what happens is that, like you're talking about right there with that, Eric, is that you start to see that there are some people that maybe aren't so much so, and they're vulnerable, and then you actually have a sense of regard for them. So some people would say, well, if you do nothing but focus on kind of aggression or conflict, it makes you that way. No, actually, I think sometimes it makes you the opposite, because you start to learn that's not what I want in my life. That's not what I want my life to be about. I'm gonna be ready if it shows up, but that's not what I want. And I actually care about other people, and I want them to have a good life and to be safe as well. So I think that one of the flip sides of actually being more comfortable in the space of physical conflict, aggression, is that it actually can possibly move you to the other end where you realize that's not who I want to be. That's not how I want my life to go. So the argument would be, oh well, the more you promote physical aggression or conflict, the worse you're going to be towards others. I've actually noticed the opposite. And if anything, that's always an important point: is how do we continually try to kind of have an increased sense of regard and respect for our fellow travelers. And I know that's one thing that my training has sort of helped me to see is that I want to try to make sure that other people live with safety and dignity as well, because I want all people to have that.
I agree. I will follow that up again from quoting Letterkenny. There's a joke or he's like talking to these hockey players and they're trying to start fights with the main character. And he's like, if you'd actually been in a fight, you probably wouldn't be so eager to be, to get in one, to try to start one. And I think there's a lot of truth that I think, especially, like Eric said, the older we get, we're less likely to do that. But we've had the experiences and gone through to learn, what damage can be done and what can be done with that physical aggression and that physical conflict. Like you do move away from it. You have these experiences. You're like, yeah, I'm gonna try actively avoid this as much as I can. Like if I need to, I can pull that out of my back pocket and I have it. But I'm comfortable enough in the situations to know that I'm not going to fall apart. And I think that helps create a sense of confidence overall. Because, like, in any confrontation, whether, even in a boardroom, and I think I hate to quote Joe Rogan on the podcast, but he talks about this too. And people have talked about that's why he's such a good, like, orator, is because he knows what he can do physically and he has it in his back pocket. He doesn't need it. He just has it in his back pocket and he's able to control himself. And he knows that, like, even in a boardroom or any kind of confrontation, like, if it's going to turn violent, I know how to handle myself. So then I can actively prevent it from turning violent. I know how to control this situation. I've seen it enough that I can control it so it won't become violent. But on the flip side, I am confident in my skills that I'm not going to let this person take advantage of me because they're not going to intimidate me. And so it becomes an equal playground. You know what's up. And admittedly, like, I'm a big person, 6'3", and now weigh 225 pounds. Like, I've always been a big person. Like, I know that I come at this conversation at a place of privilege. I always joke that I don't have a lot of natural predators in this world, right? That, like, can have this conversation and not worry about getting my ass kicked. Like, it may happen, it's possible, but, like, most of the time that's not going to be the case. But I've also had experiences with fighting. I've had experiences with, like you, Eric. I was a bouncer for years. I've put hands on people. I fought in the ring. So I have it in my back pocket. It's not that I'm big. It's that I also know that I know violence. I know physical confrontation, and I think it's a valuable lesson that we're denying young people to grow up with. I think those young people need to know what that feels like. I feel like that it creates those, but also know what it feels like and know how to avoid it. Because if you run from something, you don't know what it is, everything's going to feel like a confrontation. But if you know true confrontation, true physical conflict, like, everything else is, a conversation's easy.
Well, I think, like I had mentioned, I know we're trying to wrap up here, but I had mentioned earlier about how, self defense should be something that's taught at a younger age. But also, I think that comes along with that is teaching when it's okay, what situations to look for, would also cultivate the practices of heading off those situations and being able to see them coming. And you don't necessarily have to take a violent approach. I mean, that's just kind of the wisdom of foresight. Is that, yes, I've got this in my pocket. Yes, I can, respond and react accordingly. But let's, if we're training for, self defense, let's also train for, like I said, if we know when it's okay to do it, then we also know which situations to not put ourselves in, to not when you see that behavior happening in other people, yeah, give them a chin check. Like you have that ability if you need to, or you can take a different approach. But yeah, I think knowing how to handle a situation is just another card in your pocket. It doesn't always have to be violent, but if you can spot it from a defensive, I don't know. I've got a lot of running through my mind. I can't articulate it, but yeah, it's yeah. I think if we could train people to know when it's okay, then you can also spot situations that are not okay. Is what I'm trying to get at.
I agree. It's almost like if you compare soccer and rugby, right? It feels like we've moved into this world of soccer when we need to touch back with rugby, because rugby is one of those sports where like sometimes the ref doesn't always call stuff, and like they can escalate a game pretty quick. Like if you're throwing shitty shots, the other team's going to throw shitty shots, and it just escalates. Whereas soccer, like if you barely not even touch somebody, they suddenly flop, and it's just garbage, right? I once heard that soccer is a gentleman's game played by hooligans, and rugby is a hooligan game played by gentlemen, because they know what violence is. Like rugby players, they, geez, I tried rugby once. It's no way, not for me. But yeah, I definitely think it's something. It's like a like you said, it's a tool. All right, this has been fun. This was a good one, even though I kind of screwed up my internet, but clicking out of it. But this was a good one. Thanks. I appreciate you guys being here.
Oh yeah, glad to be here.
Yep. Thanks to you guys. I appreciate it. Fun conversation. And now I'm going to go pass gas and pick my nose.
Yeah, don't dabble in that over socialization. All right, so again, thanks for watching the FlyOverThinkers. So hit the like and subscribe button. I think this one it does a little better. If you want to email us for possible things you would like to see us talk about, you can email us at flyoverthinkers@gmail.com, or you can comment below on our YouTube thing. We're moving right along. We're making a lot of episodes, so we'll start doing a little more social media stuff, I think, here soon. So, all right. Well, thanks a lot, guys. I appreciate it.
Thanks. Everyone be well.
See you guys.
Okay, I don't know how to stop this. Just exit out of it.